A father never said the words, not because he didn't feel them, but because he didn't know how to speak them. Years after his death, his house was called haunted, not by ghosts, but by a love left unfinished. Then a Navy SEAL moved in, and his dog listened to what no one else could hear. In the silence, they uncovered the truth. A father hid all his life. I loved you, my daughter. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The first thing Griffin Vale noticed was how clean the sky looked up here. Too clean. Like winter had scrubbed it with salt and left nothing behind but light. Northern air had a way of making everything honest. It turned breath into smoke, made old wood creak without shame, and exposed the truth in people's faces the way a flashlight exposes dust in a cabin. Griffin stood at the edge of the driveway with his hands in the pockets of a worn olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years, faded at the shoulders and cuffs, the fabric carrying that quiet, stubborn life of something that refused to die just because the war had ended. He was tall, about 6 feet, and built the way disciplined work builds a body, lean, tight, not showy. Clean-shaven, jaw squared like it had been carved by cold wind. Dark brown hair cut short in a military style, just a touch longer than regulation, as if he'd allowed himself one small rebellion. His skin was light, wind-chapped, and weathered from too many mornings outside. His eyes, gray-blue, held the calm of someone who had seen chaos and learned not to flinch. Beside him stood Ranger. The German Shepherd was black and tan, athletic and alert. The kind of dog whose posture looked like a question mark turned into an exclamation point. Black along the saddle of his back and across his muzzle, golden tan at the chest and legs. He wore a simple dark leather collar, no heavy tags, no flashy gear, just the quiet uniform of a working animal that didn't need decoration to be taken seriously. Ranger's ears tracked every sound. A distant truck, the sigh of wind through pines, the soft clink of a moving strap. His eyes were dark and intelligent, watchful, without being hostile, as if the world was a puzzle he refused to solve too quickly. The moving truck groaned behind them like an old animal forced awake, and the house waited. It wasn't a haunted mansion. No twisted iron gates, no dramatic lightning, no gargoyles leering from the roof. It was simply a pale wooden house with a steep roof and a porch that had seen better years. A cabin-style practical, built for weather. It sat at the edge of trees that ran thick and tall, pines standing like a quiet jury. The price had been suspiciously low. That had been the point. Griffin didn't want luxury. He wanted distance. A place where his thoughts couldn't be interrupted by traffic and small talk. A place where the nights were honest enough to let a man sleep, or at least attempt it. A car rolled by slowly and didn't stop. The driver, a middle-aged man with a knitted cap, pulled down tight, looked at Griffin the way people look at a stranger sitting alone in an empty church. Curious, uneasy, like they weren't sure whether to offer a greeting or a prayer. Another neighbor, a woman in a thick coat, stood on her porch across the road. She watched Griffin unload boxes, watched Ranger circle the yard once, then twice, as if mapping invisible boundaries. The woman lifted a hand, started to wave, then thought better of it and went inside. Griffin felt the silence gather around him. Not simple quiet, the normal quiet of snow and woods, but a kind of quiet that came from people choosing not to speak. He set his jaw, rolled his shoulders, and went back to work. A Navy SEAL didn't wait for comfort to arrive. He built it piece by piece. By late afternoon, the sun had lowered into a pale gold. The cold sharpened. Griffin carried in the last of the boxes, boots scraping on old porch boards. Ranger followed, nails ticking lightly on wood, nose down, investigating corners with the solemn seriousness of a detective. Inside, the house smelled like pine and emptiness. Dust, old paper, a hint of metal from something forgotten in the walls. The rooms were plain, a narrow hallway, a living room with a heavy bookshelf built into one wall, a kitchen that looked like it had been waiting for someone to decide whether it was still useful. Griffin unrolled a sleeping bag near the fireplace and fed Ranger from a travel bowl. "You and me," he murmured, not because Ranger needed reassurance, but because Griffin did. Ranger looked up, ears forward, eyes steady, an animal's way of saying, "I'm here, that's enough." As dusk deepened, headlights swept across the windows. Cars passing, never stopping. People looked away. The world kept moving. Griffin noticed it the way you notice a bruise. Not because it surprises you, but because it insists on being felt. He told himself it didn't matter. Small towns always had their habits. Maybe they were wary of outsiders. Maybe they didn't like seeing a dog that looked like law enforcement. Maybe they just didn't like anyone. Still, when he stepped outside to lock the truck, he caught sight of a figure at the edge of the property, someone walking on the road with their hands in their coat pockets. A young man, maybe late 20s, slim build, pale face, beanie pulled low. He slowed, glanced toward Griffin, and his eyes widened for half a second, like he'd seen the house breathe. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He simply quickened his steps and moved on. Griffin watched him go, a small knot forming in the stomach, the same knot that used to form before doors were kicked in and rooms were cleared. Ranger's head turned too, tracking the stranger until he disappeared behind trees. Then the dog looked back at the house and held the stare longer than he should have. The first strange thing happened before the night fully arrived. Griffin was taping cardboard shut when Ranger suddenly rose from the floor, smoothly, silently, as if a string had pulled him upright. The dog's ears snapped forward. His body didn't stiffen with aggression. It stiffened with attention. Ranger walked down the hallway and stopped beside the built-in bookshelf. He pressed his nose to the wood, inhaling. Then he stepped back and let out a low sound. Not a growl that promised teeth, but something quieter, confused, almost, respectful, like he'd heard a voice only he could understand. Griffin stared at him. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't look at Griffin. He looked past the bookshelf, straight at the wall behind it, as if the wood were only pretending to be solid. Then, just as Griffin took a step forward, Ranger's head tilted slightly, listening. A faint sound drifted through the house. Not the wind, not the settling of beams. A soft, distant melody. A woman's voice, humming low, slow, tender, so intimate it felt wrong to be overheard. Griffin froze with tape in his hand. The humming stopped. The house fell quiet again. Ranger sat down, perfectly still, as if waiting for something to happen next. And Griffin, for the first time since arriving, felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. Not from fear, but from the unsettling certainty that the house wasn't as empty as it looked. Night finally took the last of the light. Griffin made a simple dinner. He kept the lights on in the kitchen, letting the rest of the house remain shadowed. Ranger lay near the doorway between rooms, positioned like a guard who wasn't sure what he was guarding against yet. When Griffin finished eating, he checked the doors and windows twice. Habit, muscle memory, the sort of discipline that stayed even after the war was gone. He found clocks in unexpected places. A wall clock in the living room, a small antique clock on a shelf in the hallway, another in the kitchen, shaped like a little house itself, its hands frozen at some point long ago. Until, oddly, it wasn't. The second hand moved, slow and steady, like it had simply been waiting for a witness. Probably batteries, Griffin muttered, more to himself than to Ranger. He turned off the lights one by one. The house felt larger in darkness, as if shadows added new hallways that didn't exist in daylight. Ranger followed Griffin to the living room where the sleeping bag lay. The dog circled twice, then sat, watching the hallway again. Griffin lay down fully dressed combat pants worn soft at the knees, old military boots, scuffed from years, an old military watch on his wrist that still kept time with stubborn accuracy. The watch face reflected a sliver of moonlight. He closed his eyes. At first, there was only the normal music of a winter house. Wood expanding and contracting. A distant ping from pipes. The hush of wind. Then the clocks began to ring. Not one, not two. All of them. A sudden chorus, sharp, loud, overlapping like a crowd trying to speak at once. The sound rose and rose, urgent and strange, as if time itself had decided to panic. Griffin's eyes opened instantly. His body responded before his mind, heart rate up, muscles ready. He sat upright, scanning the darkness. Ranger stood too, hackles not raised, but every line of him taut. He didn't bark. He didn't charge. He listened, head angled, ears flicking, tracking the direction of sound. And then, cutting through the ringing, came that other sound again. A woman's voice, soft, close enough to feel, far enough to doubt. Hush now, hush. A lullaby, not performed, not acted, not dramatic, just mothering. Griffin held his breath as if breathing might scare it away. The melody carried a sorrow so gentle it was almost worse than fear. It was the sadness of someone who loved too much and had nowhere to put it. Ranger took 3 careful steps into the hallway, nose lifted, eyes fixed. Griffin followed, slow and quiet, careful not to make sudden noise. The clocks continued their frantic chiming for another few seconds. Then, as abruptly as they started, they fell silent. The lullaby remained. Ranger paused beside the bookshelf again. He stared at it, then looked back at Griffin, as if asking permission to do what instinct demanded. Griffin's throat tightened. He reached out and touched Ranger's shoulder, lightly, steadying himself. The lullaby wavered, grew faint, as if whoever sang it had stepped away. Then it stopped. Silence filled the house like cold water. Griffin waited a long moment. He checked the living room, the kitchen, the front door. No signs of entry, no footsteps, no human warmth, no movement, nothing. He returned to the sleeping bag, But the house no longer felt like an empty purchase. It felt like a story that had been waiting for a reader. Griffin lay down again. Ranger curled near his feet, still facing the hallway. Outside, wind moved through the pines, sounding for all the world like whispers exchanged between old gods who enjoyed watching mortals pretend they were alone. Griffin closed his eyes. This time, sleep came heavier, dragging him under like a tide. And somewhere, between waking and dreaming, he thought he heard the lullaby return, so faint it might have been memory or the house practicing its secrets. Ranger's ear flicked once in the dark, as if to say, "It's real." And in the quiet, the new owner of the house no one wanted drifted into uneasy rest, while the cabin held its breath, waiting for what he would do next. Morning arrived quietly, as if the night had agreed to withdraw without apology. Griffin Vale woke before the sun fully cleared the trees. Pale light slipped through the thin curtains and laid itself across the wooden floor like a cautious visitor. His body felt heavier than it should have after a single night's rest. Not the sharp fatigue of danger or sleepless vigilance, but a dull, dragging exhaustion, the kind that made a man feel as though part of him had been borrowed and not yet returned. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house was silent. No clocks, no humming, no voice. Only the distant creak of timber adjusting to cold and the soft rhythm of another breath nearby. Ranger lay curled near the hallway entrance, his black and tan coat catching the morning light in muted contrast. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, mature enough to be steady, young enough to remain alert. His ears twitched once as Griffin shifted, then relaxed again. He did not sleep deeply here. Griffin could tell. Ranger was resting, not surrendering. Griffin swung his legs off the sleeping bag and stood slowly, boots whispering against the floor. His old military watch ticked with familiar certainty. Time, at least, still behaved. He walked through the house in daylight, retracing steps from the night before. The hallway looked narrower now. The built-in bookshelf dark wood, solid, deceptively ordinary, gave nothing away. In sunlight, the place felt almost apologetic. Just a house, just wood and walls and air. "Guess you don't look so bad," Griffin murmured. Ranger followed him into the kitchen, tail low but relaxed. The dog sniffed the corners again, nose brushing baseboards, then paused briefly at the doorway before moving on. Griffin noticed it, filed it away without comment. Years of training had taught him when to ask questions and when to let silence answer first. Outside, the world had resumed its distance. Griffin stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee warming his hands. Breath fogged the air. The trees stood tall and unmoved, their needles catching frost like tiny stars. Somewhere down the road, a car engine started, then faded. A woman across the street opened her front door, stepped out, and froze when she saw him. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, medium height, wrapped in a thick wool coat the color of wet stone. Her hair was dark blonde streaked with gray, pulled back in a practical knot. Her face carried lines earned by cold winters and long habits of restraint. She held a grocery bag in one hand. Their eyes met. For half a second, she looked like she wanted to speak. Then she looked at the house behind Griffin. And whatever she saw, there made her lips press together. She nodded once, sharply, and retreated indoors without a word. Griffin watched the door close. "Friendly place," he said dryly. Ranger's ears flicked, but the dog remained calm. By late morning, Griffin decided standing still wouldn't solve anything. He clipped Ranger's leash on and headed down the road toward town. Snow crunched beneath boots. The sky remained painfully clear, as if determined to offer no distractions. A few people passed them. A man jogging slowed his pace when he noticed the house key hanging from Griffin's belt. A teenager riding a bike swerved slightly to give extra distance. No one said hello. No one asked questions. They knew. They just didn't want to be the one to say it. The road curved near a small cluster of mailboxes. That was where Griffin saw her. The woman was struggling with a canvas grocery bag that had split at the seam. Cans rolled across the frozen ground. Apples scattered. She bent slowly to retrieve them, movement careful and deliberate. Griffin crossed the road without hesitation. "Ma'am, let me help you with that." She looked up sharply. She was older than he'd thought. Late 70s, perhaps. Thin, but not fragile. Her back was straight, her movements measured. Her hair was white and worn short, tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat. Her eyes were sharp blue-gray, assessing, not easily fooled. For a heartbeat, she stared at Griffin like he might vanish if she blinked. Then she exhaled. "Well," she said, voice dry as pine bark, "I suppose you're real after all." Griffin smiled faintly and knelt to gather the fallen items. Ranger sat obediently beside him, watching the woman with quiet interest. "You look like you've carried heavier things," she added, observing him. "But you move like someone who knows when not to rush." "Occupational habit," Griffin replied. "I'm Griffin." "Martha Pine," she said. "Been here longer than most of these trees." She eyed Ranger next. "And you?" Ranger tilted his head. "That's Ranger," Griffin said. "He doesn't talk much." Martha gave a thin smile. "Smart dog." They finished repacking the groceries. Griffin lifted the bag easily and offered it back. "You live around here?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Martha hesitated. "Across the bend," she said, then added, "Not there." Griffin nodded once. "I moved in yesterday." The silence stretched. Martha studied his face more carefully now. The clean-shaven jaw, the calm eyes, the posture that didn't need to announce itself. "You hear anything last night?" she asked quietly. Griffin didn't answer right away. "Why do you ask?" Martha looked down the road, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "Because if you didn't," she said, "you're either deaf or lucky." Ranger shifted his weight, ears angling forward. Martha's gaze dropped to the dog. Something in her expression softened. "There used to be an old man there," she said. "Edgar Hallow, kept to himself, polite but distant, the kind of man who always closed his curtains before dark." Griffin listened without interrupting. "He had a wife once. Evelyn, sweet woman, died years back. Car accident. She was shielding their little girl when it happened. Martha swallowed. Saved the child. Lost herself." She shook her head slowly. "After that, Edgar changed, became strict, sharp, afraid, if you ask me, but fear comes out sideways in men like him." "And the girl?" Griffin asked. "Rosalind, bright child, sensitive. She grew up under that roof with a father who loved her but didn't know how to show it. Not kindly, anyway. Martha sighed. She left young, went far, didn't come back much. What about Edgar? Griffin asked. Martha's mouth tightened. He died last winter, alone. Griffin felt something settle in his chest. Not sorrow exactly, but recognition. And the noises? He asked. Martha looked him straight in the eye. Started a few months after he passed, she said, soft at first. Like a memory you're not sure you heard. Then louder, regular, same hours, same song. What song? A lullaby, Martha said. The kind a mother sings when she doesn't want the world waking her child too soon. Griffin nodded slowly. And no one checked the house? He asked. Martha snorted softly. People don't go looking for grief once it's settled in. They step around it, call it something else. She hesitated, then added, Besides, no one wants to be the fool who tells the police they're hearing ghosts. They walked together for a short distance before parting ways. Martha paused before leaving, eyes lingering on Griffin and Ranger. You're not what I expected, she said. Neither is the house, Griffin replied. Martha's lips curved, sad and knowing. Be careful, she said. Some places don't like being understood. She turned and walked away. Griffin watched her go, the weight of her words settling deeper than he cared to admit. As Griffin and Ranger headed back toward the house, Ranger suddenly stopped. Not abruptly. Not in alarm. He stopped the way a compass needle stops turning because it has found north. The dog's gaze fixed on the upstairs window of the house. The curtains there were closed. No movement. No light. Ranger's tail stilled. His ears angled forward. Then slowly, deliberately, he sat down and whimpered, not in fear, in recognition. Griffin felt a chill trace his spine. Ranger, he murmured. The dog didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the window, as if waiting for someone who had once stood there and no longer could. That afternoon passed quietly. Griffin unpacked more boxes. He installed new batteries in the clocks. They ticked obediently, evenly, without complaint. Yet as dusk returned, the house seemed to draw inward. The light thinned, shadows deepened. Griffin cooked a simple meal, his movements measured, deliberate. Ranger lay nearby, alert but calm. No sounds came, no voices, no music. Only the quiet persistence of a place that had learned patience. Griffin sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the bookshelf again. Not because it had done anything wrong, but because it hadn't done anything at all. Somewhere beneath the wood and plaster, he felt certain something waited, not to frighten, but to be heard. As night settled fully, Griffin turned off the lights and stood in the dark for a long moment, breathing in the cold, clean scent of pine. Whatever lived in this house memory, grief, or something stranger, it wasn't finished speaking. And Griffin Vale had never been good at ignoring voices that refused to stay silent. Griffin Vale learned the house best in the hours when it pretended to be ordinary. Morning light stripped away much of its mystery. The walls looked thinner in daylight, less secretive. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, and the wooden floorboards creaked with the honest complaint of age, not accusation. If someone had walked in without knowing the rumors, they might have thought the place merely old, quiet, forgotten by time, but not dangerous. Griffin did not trust appearances. He spent the early hours moving through the house slowly, deliberately, the way he once cleared unfamiliar structures overseas. Not with tension, but with respect. He opened cupboards, checked vents, traced the lines where wall met ceiling. His movements were economical, his mind cataloging details without rushing to conclusions. Ranger followed at a measured distance. The German shepherd did not crowd him or run ahead recklessly. He moved like a trained companion 5 years old, in the prime of his strength, with a calm confidence earned through routine rather than force. His black and tan coat caught the light differently as he shifted, dark along the spine, warm gold at the legs and chest. His ears flicked constantly, adjusting to the smallest sounds, but his tail stayed low and relaxed. What unsettled Griffin was not what Ranger did, but what he didn't. The dog no longer paced the hallway. He did not fixate on the bookshelf the way he had the day before. Instead, he drifted from room to room, occasionally stopping, listening, then moving on. It was as if whatever had drawn his attention earlier had settled back into silence, or learned patience. Griffin made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the road. A pickup truck passed. This time, the driver slowed. The man behind the wheel was in his late 30s or early 40s, broad-shouldered, with a beard trimmed short, and hair tucked beneath a baseball cap worn thin from years of use. His face carried the look of someone accustomed to physical labor, creased from sun and wind rather than age. He slowed, hesitated, then pulled over near the mailbox. Griffin stepped onto the porch. The man got out of the truck slowly, hands visible, posture open, but cautious. "Morning," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the house behind Griffin. "Name's Tom Weaver." "Griffin," Griffin replied. "This is Ranger." Ranger sat beside him without being told. Tom nodded once, approving. "Good dog." He shifted his weight, boots crunching on gravel. "Figured I should say hello. Didn't sit right, everyone pretending you weren't here." Griffin studied him. Tom didn't look afraid, just conflicted. "You live nearby?" Griffin asked. "Couple houses down," Tom said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "Been here most of my life. Worked construction. Helped build some of these places back when my knees didn't scream at me every morning." Griffin gave a faint smile. "What made you stop?" Tom's jaw tightened briefly. "Accident. Fell off scaffolding 10 years back. Buddy of mine didn't walk away from his." The words sat between them, heavy but honest. Griffin understood that kind of silence. Tom cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not here to scare you off, but people around here get weird about that house." "So I've noticed," Griffin said. Tom exhaled through his nose. "Edgar Hallow and I didn't get along. That's the truth of it. Man was stubborn as frozen ground. Thought the world owed him obedience." He paused. "But he wasn't cruel. Not the way folks like to remember." Griffin listened. After his wife died, he kept to himself. Didn't want help. Didn't want sympathy. People don't like that. Tom shrugged. Easier to turn a man into a ghost than admit he was just broken. "And the noises?" Griffin asked. Tom's gaze dropped to the gravel. "I never heard them myself. Not clearly. Just enough to make you wonder if your ears were lying to you." He looked up again. "But I do know this, no one's been in that house since Edgar passed. Not officially." "Officially," Griffin echoed. Tom hesitated. Kids, teenagers, dare each other sometimes, but they don't stay long. Ranger lifted his head slightly, ears angling forward. Tom noticed. Dog hears better than we do. He listens differently, Griffin said. Tom nodded, then stepped back. Anyway, if you need anything, tools, advice, help with the place, you can find me. He hesitated again. Just don't let the house make decisions for you. With that, he climbed back into his truck and drove off. Griffin remained on the porch for a long moment, watching the road until it emptied again. That afternoon, he focused on the practical. He replaced batteries in every clock he could find. Wall clocks, shelf clocks, even the small decorative one shaped like a cabin. He set them carefully, syncing them to his watch. The ticking became uniform, controlled, predictable. Ranger watched, head resting on his paws, eyes following Griffin's hands. You don't like surprises either, do you? Griffin murmured. The dog's tail thumped once. As the sun began its slow descent, Griffin noticed something subtle. The house grew quieter, not louder. The air felt expectant, as if it knew what time it was. Griffin checked his watch. Early evening. He sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook, jotting observations. Time patterns, sounds, reactions. It was how he had survived before, by turning uncertainty into data. That was when Ranger stood, not abruptly, not alarmed. He walked toward the living room and stopped near the center, looking up, not at the bookshelf, not at the walls, but at the ceiling. His ears flattened slightly. His head tilted. Griffin followed his gaze. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Then Ranger walked to the hallway and sat facing the far end, where the bedrooms lay dark. His posture was calm, but intent. Waiting. Griffin checked the hallway himself, then returned to the living room. Ranger did not move. Minutes passed. Then, very faintly, Griffin felt it. Not a sound. A vibration. Like a distant engine running far underground, barely perceptible, more felt in the bones than heard by the ears. The glasses in the cabinet trembled once, then settled. Ranger's ears twitched. He did not bark. He did not retreat. He simply lay down, placing his head flat against the floor, as if listening through the house itself. Griffin's breath slowed. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. And it wasn't alive in the way people feared. The vibration faded as quietly as it had come. Night arrived without ceremony. Griffin cooked dinner, the normal sounds of pans and cutlery grounding him. He ate slowly, eyes drifting occasionally toward the hallway. Ranger remained near, alert but composed. The clocks ticked on. Evening deepened. Griffin sat in the living room with the lights low, not off. He wanted to see the shadows, not drown them. When the first chime sounded, it came from a single clock. Then another answered. Then another, not chaos, sequence. Griffin watched his watch as the sounds unfolded. Each chime followed a pattern, intervals measured, almost careful. This wasn't panic, this was design. The final chime faded. Silence returned. No lullaby followed. Griffin frowned slightly, not in disappointment, but in confirmation. The house was capable of restraint. Ranger rose and walked slowly toward the hallway, stopping at the same spot as before. He looked back at Griffin once, then forward again. All right, Griffin said quietly. I hear you. He didn't know who or what he was addressing, only that something in the house responded to attention, not fear. Later, as Griffin prepared for bed, he noticed his fatigue again. The dull heaviness settled into his limbs, stronger than the night before. He lay down fully dressed, one hand resting near Ranger's back. The dog curled beside him, warm and steady. Griffin stared at the ceiling. Some houses remembered footsteps. This one remembered time. As sleep pulled him under, he realized the most unsettling truth of all. Whatever lingered here wasn't trying to scare him away. It was repeating itself, waiting for someone to notice. Griffin Vale woke before dawn, not because of a sound, but because of a feeling like the house had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The air was cold enough to sting. Pale light slid across the ceiling, stopping short of the hallway. Ranger lay stretched along the edge of the sleeping bag, black and tan coat rising and falling in slow, disciplined breaths. At 5 years old, the German shepherd had learned the difference between rest and vigilance. This morning, he chose vigilance. One ear lifted, then both. He didn't move. Griffin sat up and rubbed his eyes. The fatigue was still there, a weight that didn't belong to a single bad night. It felt cumulative, like the cost of attention. He rose quietly, careful not to startle Ranger, and stood in the living room, listening. No clocks chimed. No vibration pressed up through the floor. The house was ordinary again, almost apologetic. All right, Griffin murmured. Let's see what you're hiding. He moved methodically, not searching yet, observing. He traced the edges of the built-in bookshelf with his eyes. Dark wood, heavy, fitted into the wall like it had grown there. The shelves were deep, uneven in places, the kind of craftsmanship that predated shortcuts. The wall behind it looked too straight, too uniform. Ranger rose and walked a slow circle, nose low. He stopped near the bookshelf, inhaled, then moved away. No fixation, no warning. Just information. Griffin made coffee and ate a spare breakfast. He checked his watch. The morning had a narrow window before town woke fully, before questions began. He needed tools. The drive into town was short. The road curled past frozen fields and bare trees, the sky wide and clean above it all. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes forward, posture calm. The hardware store sat at the edge of town, a low building with a faded sign and a bell that rang when Griffin pushed the door open. The smell of oil and sawdust wrapped around him. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore a flannel shirt layered under a work vest, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Her face was sharp, and expressive strong cheekbones, warm brown eyes that missed very little. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow, old and healed. She looked up and smiled, quick and genuine. "Morning?" "Morning," Griffin replied. She glanced past him at Ranger, who waited just inside the doorway, calm and composed. Her smile softened. "He's beautiful." "Ranger," Griffin said. "Figures," she said. "I'm Lila Mora." Griffin paused. "Deputy?" She nodded, tapping the badge clipped to her vest. "Off duty, helping my uncle keep the place running." She tilted her head, studying Griffin, not suspicious. just curious. You're new? Yes, ma'am. Don't call me that, Lila said, amused. Makes me feel older than I am. Griffin asked for a pry bar, a stud finder, a flashlight. Lila raised an eyebrow. Renovations? She asked. Inspection, Griffin said. Of that house, she added, not asking. Griffin met her gaze evenly. Of my house. Lila nodded slowly. Fair. She rang him up, then hesitated. If you find something you can't explain, she said, choosing her words carefully, call me. Not because I think it's dangerous, but because people talk, and they talk louder when they're afraid. Griffin nodded once. Understood. Back at the house, the afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust and setting it adrift. Griffin started with the bookshelf. He cleared the shelves carefully, stacking books by size, by weight, old paper, faded spines, margins marked with a precise, restrained hand. Edgar's hand, Griffin thought. Notes written like commands that hoped to be kind. Ranger lay nearby, eyes open, head on his paws. He watched Griffin, then the wall, then the floor, never the ceiling. Griffin ran the stud finder along the bookshelf. It chirped and went quiet, chirped again. The readings didn't match what he expected. He pressed the pry bar gently against the seam where wood met wall. The shelf shifted. Not much, but enough. Griffin stepped back, heart steady. He tried again, carefully, evenly. The bookshelf moved a fraction, then caught on something hidden beneath. A latch. Ranger, Griffin said softly. The dog rose and came to his side, not excited, not afraid. Present. Griffin eased the latch free. The bookshelf slid aside with a sigh of old mechanisms, revealing a narrow doorway cut cleanly into the wall. No dust spilled out. No stale air rushed forward. The room beyond was preserved. Smaller than Griffin expected. Narrow. Intimate. The walls were lined with photographs, framed, dusted, arranged with care. A woman with dark hair and gentle eyes smiled from many of them. Her arm around a little girl whose face changed with age but never lost its brightness. A machine sat on a small table, a projector, old but well-maintained. Beside it, a mechanical timer metal, precise, handmade. Wires ran neatly along the baseboard, disappearing into the wall. Ranger stepped forward, sniffed once, then sat. He did not cross the threshold. Griffin swallowed. He took a step inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and oil, of time, held still. On a shelf lay a stack of envelopes, yellowed, each addressed in the same careful script, none stamped, none sealed. Griffin picked one up and read the name. Rosalind. He did not open it yet. He moved to the projector and examined it, hands steady. The timer was set to interval short windows, precise down to the minute. This was not chaos. This was intention. He flipped a switch. The machine whirred to life, quiet and respectful. Light spilled onto a blank section of wall. Grainy footage appeared. A woman seated in a rocking chair, cradling a baby. Her voice filled the room, soft, patient, a lullaby shaped by breath and love. Griffin felt his chest tighten. Ranger's ears lowered. His tail rested still against the floor. He leaned slightly into Griffin's leg, grounding him. Griffin shut the projector off. He stood there for a long time, absorbing the truth of it. Grief preserved, not weaponized. memory repeating itself because no one had answered it. As Griffin turned to leave the room, he noticed something he'd missed. A small mirror hung beside the door frame, tilted just enough to catch the hallway behind him. In the glass, for a heartbeat, Griffin saw movement that wasn't his own. Not a figure, not a face. A child's height passing the doorway just out of sight. Griffin spun around. The hallway was empty. Ranger stood, alert but calm, eyes on the mirror now, not the doorway. Griffin reached out and steadied the mirror. It stopped trembling. He exhaled slowly. Memory, he told himself. Reflections. Light. Still, he closed the hidden door gently, sliding the bookshelf back into place until it locked with a soft, final click. That evening, Griffin sat at the kitchen table with the letters spread before him. He read them one by one. Edgar's words were clumsy, precise, full of instruction and restraint. Apologies written like reports, love expressed as concern. I didn't know how to speak when you needed comfort. I only knew how to keep you alive. Griffin folded the letters carefully and returned them to the shelf. He called Lila as dusk settled. I found something, he said. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. That's not a crime, she said finally, but it explains a lot. I'm not looking to shut it down, Griffin replied. I'm looking to understand it. Then you're already doing better than most, Lila said. Keep me posted. Night came without drama. The clocks ticked evenly. No vibration rose from the floor. No song drifted through the walls. Ranger lay near the bookshelf, head up, eyes open but relaxed. Griffin lay down, fully clothed, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder. He stared at the ceiling, not afraid now, just aware. Some rooms hid from time. Some people hid their love. This house had done both. And Griffin Vale, who had learned long ago how to clear rooms and carry the weight of other people's silence, closed his eyes knowing one thing for certain. The house wasn't asking him to leave. It was asking him to listen. The house felt different once the truth had a shape. Griffin noticed it the moment he woke. Not lighter, not warmer, just steadier, like a storm that had revealed its center. Morning light spilled across the living room floor, touching the bookshelf without accusation. Ranger lay stretched near it, head resting on his paws, eyes open but calm. He no longer guarded the space. He kept watch over it. Griffin sat up slowly, the familiar weight of fatigue still present but no longer oppressive. It felt earned now, like the exhaustion that followed a long patrol, not confusion, but consequence. He made coffee and carried the mug to the table where the letters waited. They were stacked neatly, edges aligned, envelopes yellowed by time but not by neglect. Edgar Hallow had cared for these pages. That much was clear. Griffin picked up the first one, hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was precise, almost rigid. Letters formed carefully, each word placed with intent. Not elegant, but disciplined. Rosalind, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a command. So I will say it plainly. I was afraid. I am still afraid. When your mother died, I learned something about love that I did not want to learn, that it can leave you without permission. I did not know how to protect you except by making you strong. Griffin read slowly, absorbing not just the words, but the effort behind them. The next letter spoke of school, of worry, of pride written between lines of concern. Another letter was shorter. You looked at me today like I was a stranger. I suppose I have earned that. I hope one day you understand that silence is not absence. It is the only language I knew. Griffin closed his eyes. He had seen this kind of silence before. Men who had learned to survive first, and only later realized they had forgotten how to live. Ranger shifted beside him, resting his chin briefly on Griffin's knee. The dog's eyes were gentle, observant, offering presence without demand. Yeah, Griffin murmured. I know. By mid-morning, Griffin had read them all. None were sent. None were finished properly. Each ended the same way, with restraint, not resolution. He gathered the letters carefully and returned them to their place in the hidden room. Then he sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the wall where the bookshelf hid its secret. Knowing the truth didn't tell him what to do with it. That question answered itself an hour later. Griffin drove into town with Ranger riding shotgun, posture relaxed but alert. The road curved past familiar landmarks, now mailboxes, fences, the hardware store. Where Lila had stood, with her sleeves rolled and her eyes sharp. This time, he drove past it. The real estate office sat closer to the town center, a modest building with wide windows and a sign that read, Brooks and Keogh. Griffin parked and stepped inside. Helen Brooks looked up from her desk. She was in her late 40s, tall and composed, with auburn hair cut just below the shoulders and glasses perched low on her nose. Her posture was practiced confidence, the kind built from years of negotiating between expectations and reality. She smiled automatically, then paused when she recognized him. You settled in, she said. Yes, Griffin replied. Mostly. Her smile thinned slightly. That house doesn't do anything halfway. I need information, Griffin said, about the previous owner's daughter. Helen's expression shifted, not alarmed, but cautious. That's sensitive, she said. I know. She studied him more closely now. The clean-shaven jaw, the steady eyes, the lack of urgency in his voice. You're not planning to force contact, she said. No, Griffin replied. I'm planning to offer truth. She can decide what to do with it. Helen leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Rosalind Hallow moved away years ago. Changed addresses twice. She left no forwarding instructions tied to the property. I don't need an address, Griffin said. I need a way to reach her. Helen sighed. I can pass along a message. That's all. That's enough. Helen nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Outside, Ranger waited patiently by the door. Griffin clipped the leash back on and headed toward the car. They didn't speak on the drive home. The house greeted them with quiet. Griffin spent the afternoon repairing small things, tightening a loose hinge, sealing a draft near the window, fixing what could be fixed. It felt right to care for the place now that he understood it. Ranger followed him from room to room, stopping occasionally to watch the bookshelf, then moving on. No tension, no warning. As dusk approached, Griffin's phone buzzed. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Vale? A woman's voice asked, controlled, cool. Yes, this is Rosalind Hallow. Her voice was steady, but there was a tightness beneath it, like someone holding a door shut with one hand. I was told you had something to say. Yes, Griffin replied, but not like this, not over the phone. There was a pause. "You live in my father's house," she said. "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't want anything from that place," Rosalind said. "Not the money, not the memories, not the excuses." Griffin leaned against the counter, eyes on the window where the last light faded into blue. "I'm not offering excuses," he said. "I'm offering context." Silence. "You're a stranger," she said. "Yes." "And you think you know my father better than I did?" "No," Griffin replied. "I think I know something he never managed to tell you." Her breath caught, just enough for Griffin to hear. "I don't want to meet," Rosalind said quickly. "I won't come to you," Griffin said. "If you decide to walk away, that's your right. But before you do, there's something that belongs to you." Another silence. This one trembled. "What?" she asked. Griffin looked down at the small object on the table beside him. A cloth-wrapped bundle he had retrieved from the hidden room earlier that afternoon. "A doll," he said. "The one your father gave you when you slept in your own room for the first time." The line went very quiet. "How could you possibly?" Rosalind began, then stopped. Griffin did not rush. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," he said gently. "I'm asking you to see him fully." The call ended without agreement. Griffin stood there for a long time after the line went dead, phone still in his hand. Ranger approached and nudged his leg, a simple, grounding touch. That night, Griffin sat alone in the living room, the house lit softly around him. The clocks ticked evenly, no chimes, no vibrations. He held the doll in his hands now. It was small, worn at the edges. Its fabric faded from years of being held too tightly. A patch had been sewn into its side, not expertly, but carefully. Griffin turned it over. Stitched into the fabric, almost hidden, were two initials. E.H., not for Edgar, for Evelyn Hallow. Griffin closed his eyes. Some things were never meant to disappear. The night passed without incident. Griffin slept deeper than he had since arriving. Dreams quiet and untroubled. Ranger remained close, steady and warm. In the morning, Griffin returned the doll to the hidden room. He placed it carefully beside the letters, then stood back, letting the space breathe. He did not turn the projector on. Some memories deserved rest. Late that afternoon, his phone rang again. Same number. "I'll meet you," Rosalind said. Her voice was different now. Still guarded, but no longer brittle. "There's a diner on Route 9. Tomorrow, noon." Griffin exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said. She did not respond. The call ended. Griffin stood in the quiet house, the decision settling into place. Outside, Ranger lifted his head and looked toward the road, ears pricked not in warning, but in anticipation. Griffin rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers brushing the warm fur. "Looks like we're not done yet," he said. Ranger's tail thumped once. The house remained silent behind them, not empty, not restless, just waiting. Route 9 ran straight through the valley like a held breath. It cut past frozen fields and abandoned barns, past a river that had learned how to move beneath ice without cracking it. The diner sat alone along that stretch of road, low, wide, and stubborn, with a flickering neon sign that hadn't fully worked in years. Harriet's Diner glowed in tired red letters, the R permanently dim. Griffinvale parked a few spaces away from the entrance and shut off the engine. For a moment, He didn't move. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, posture calm but alert. His black and tan coat caught the gray daylight filtering through the windshield. At 5 years old, the German Shepherd had developed a quiet patience, no restless energy, no needless tension. His eyes tracked the entrance to the diner, then shifted to Griffin, waiting. "This one's on me," Griffin said softly. Ranger's tail thumped once. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, grease, and something faintly sweet pie cooling somewhere behind the counter. Vinyl booths lined the windows. A few locals occupied the far end, speaking in low voices. A waitress moved between tables with practiced ease. Rosalind Hallow sat alone in the booth nearest the window. She was in her early 30s, slender but not fragile, with a posture that suggested independence built out of necessity rather than comfort. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose knot at the base of her neck, strands escaping to frame a face both sharp and tired. Her skin was pale, touched by winter, and her eyes, gray-brown and observant, held a guarded intelligence. She wore a plain wool coat and kept her hands folded tightly around a coffee mug as if it anchored her. She did not look at the door when Griffin entered. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Rosalind," he said. She lifted her gaze then, and Griffin felt the weight of it. Not anger, not fear, assessment. "You brought the dog," she said. "Yes," Griffin replied. "If that's not okay." "It's fine," she said quickly. Her eyes flicked to Ranger, who sat neatly beside Griffin, head level, ears forward, but relaxed. "He behaves better than most people." That earned a faint, involuntary smile from Griffin. He slid into the booth across from her. Ranger lay down beside his boots, resting his chin on his paws. For a moment, neither spoke. Rosalind broke the silence first. "You didn't tell me everything on the phone," she said. "I didn't think I should," Griffin replied. "Some things don't belong in a first conversation." Her lips pressed together. "Fair." A waitress appeared, middle-aged, soft-spoken, with tired eyes and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She glanced at Rosalind, then Griffin. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please," Griffin said. Rosalind nodded. "Same." When the waitress left, Rosalind leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "So," she said, "you live in my father's house." "Yes." "And you found his collection?" "Yes." She studied him closely now. The clean-shaven jaw, the controlled stillness, the eyes that didn't flinch under scrutiny. "You're military," she said. "Was." "That explains why you talk like you're diffusing something," she said dryly. Griffin didn't smile. "Some things are fragile." Rosalind exhaled through her nose. "My father wasn't fragile." "No," Griffin agreed, "but what he carried was." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "You know what he was like," she said. "Everyone always says they do. They say he was grieving. They say he was trying his best." Her voice hardened. "But they didn't live with him." "I'm not here to tell you how to feel," Griffin said. "I wouldn't dare." She looked away, out the window. The road stretched on, empty. "He never hit me," she said quietly. "People like to ask that, like there's only one way to hurt someone." Griffin said nothing. "He was precise," Rosalind continued. "Rules for everything. No mistakes, no excuses. I learned early that love, to him, came with conditions." The waitress returned and set down the coffees. She glanced at Ranger, smiled briefly, then moved on. Griffin waited until she was out of earshot. "I found letters," he said. Rosalind's jaw tightened. I figured. They were never sent. She laughed softly, without humor. Of course they weren't. Griffin reached into his jacket pocket, but didn't take anything out yet. He wrote about your mother, he said, about the accident, about what he was afraid of becoming afterward. Rosalind closed her eyes for a moment. My mother used to sing, she said, at night, even when she was tired. Her voice wavered slightly. He hated it, said it spoiled me. Griffin met her gaze. He kept recordings of it. Her eyes snapped open. What? In a room he hid behind the bookshelf, Griffin said. He preserved it, played it on a schedule. Rosalind stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. That's not funny, she said. I know, Griffin replied. That's why I wouldn't say it unless it were true. Her hands trembled now, just barely. You're telling me, she said slowly, that the house everyone thinks is haunted is playing my mother's voice? Yes. Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Rosalind looked down at her coffee, then back up. You expect me to believe he did that out of love? She asked. I think he did it out of regret, Griffin said. Love just happened to be part of it. She leaned back, shaking her head. You didn't know him. No, Griffin said, but I know men who don't know how to stop being afraid. That landed harder than either of them expected. Rosalind's gaze dropped to Ranger. The dog had lifted his head slightly, watching her now, not staring, not intruding, simply present. He looks at people like he's listening, she said. He is, Griffin replied. Rosalind reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A photograph. She slid it across the table toward Griffin. It showed a younger Edgar Hallow standing stiffly beside a little girl with a missing front tooth. His hand rested on her shoulder, not gently, but firmly. Behind them, a woman laughed, caught mid-motion. My mother took this, Rosalind said, right before everything fell apart. Griffin studied the image. Ranger rose slowly and placed his front paws against the edge of the booth, careful not to touch Rosalind. He leaned forward, nose hovering inches above the photograph. Then he whined softly. Rosalind's breath caught. He never does that, Griffin said quietly. Ranger lowered his head and sat again, eyes still on the photograph. Rosalind pressed her lips together, fighting something rising fast and sharp in her chest. She pulled the photo back and tucked it away. You said you had something that belonged to me, she said, voice steadier now. Griffin reached into his jacket and unwrapped the cloth bundle. The doll rested in his hands, small, worn, carefully repaired. Its fabric was faded, but the stitches along its side were neat and deliberate. Rosalind froze. That, her voice failed her. My father gave me that, she whispered, the night I slept alone for the first time. He kept it, Griffin said. He fixed it when it tore. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Not yet. You don't get to give this back like it fixes anything, she said, voice tight. I know, Griffin replied. That's why. I didn't bring it to convince you. She looked at him sharply. Then why bring it at all? Because it proves one thing, Griffin said, that whatever else he failed at, he never stopped being your father. Rosalind stared at the doll, then at Griffin. Finally, she reached out and took it. Her hands shook. I hated that house, she said. I hated what it turned him into. I hated that I couldn't stay without losing myself. Griffin nodded. You shouldn't have had to choose. She looked down at the doll, thumb brushing the stitched patch. "You think going back there will help," she said, not a question. "I think avoiding it has cost you more than you realize," Griffin said carefully. "But the choice is yours." Rosalind was quiet for a long time. Outside, a truck passed on Route 9, tires humming against cold asphalt. Finally, she spoke. "I don't want to be alone when I go back," she said. Griffin met her eyes. "You won't be." She hesitated. "The dog comes too." Ranger's ears perked. Griffin nodded. "He wouldn't forgive me if I left him." That almost made her smile. They stood together outside the diner a few minutes later, the cold biting sharply now. Rosalind paused by her car. "Tomorrow," she said. "Evening." Griffin nodded. "I'll be there." She glanced at the road, then back at him. "If this is a mistake—" "It's an honest one," Griffin said. She nodded once and got into her car. Griffin watched her drive away until she disappeared around the bend. Ranger sat beside him, eyes following the same path. "Good work," Griffin murmured, resting a hand on the dog's head. Ranger leaned into the touch, steady and warm. The road stretched on, quiet and open, and for the first time since buying the house no one wanted, Griffin felt certain of one thing. Some doors didn't need to be forced. They needed to be walked through together. Evening came gently, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. Griffin Vale stood on the porch and watched the last light slide behind the trees. The air had sharpened, clean, cold, honest. He adjusted the porch lamp so it cast a steady glow across the steps, not bright enough to interrogate, not dim enough to hide things. Ranger waited beside him, black and tan coat catching the amber light, posture calm and grounded. At 5 years old, the German Shepherd had learned patience as a language. Tonight, he spoke it fluently. A car approached along the road and slowed as it neared the driveway. Rosalind Hallow parked near the edge of the gravel and sat for a moment before opening the door. She stepped out carefully, wool coat buttoned to her throat, dark hair pulled back in a practical tie that didn't quite hide the way her hands trembled. She looked thinner here than she had at the diner, like the land itself stripped away the defenses she'd built elsewhere. Griffin met her halfway down the path. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," Rosalind replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes kept drifting to the house. "That's why I am." Ranger approached her without invitation, stopped a respectful distance away, and sat. He looked up at her with that attentive stillness that felt less like judgment and more like recognition. She exhaled and nodded once. "All right," she said, "let's go." Inside, the house greeted them with silence. Not the tense, listening silence of earlier days, but something looser, as if the walls had decided not to hold their breath anymore. Griffin turned on a few lights, leaving others off. The rooms felt smaller now, more human. Rosalind stepped slowly, eyes tracing the familiar angles she hadn't seen in years. Her gaze lingered on the living room window, the place where she used to sit with her mother during winter storms, counting lightning seconds. "I forgot how narrow the hallway was," she said. "As a kid, it felt endless." "Everything does," Griffin replied. They stopped in front of the bookshelf. Rosalind's breath caught. "You hit it well," she said. "He hit it," Griffin corrected gently. She nodded. Griffin moved the latch and slid the bookshelf aside. The hidden doorway revealed itself again, not dramatic, just patient. The room beyond glowed softly, lit by a single lamp Griffin had left on earlier. Photographs lined the walls. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and oil. Rosalind stood frozen at the threshold. Ranger sat behind her, still and watchful, as if guarding her courage. She stepped inside. Her eyes moved quickly at first, too quickly, skimming the frames, the shelves, the corners. Then she slowed, stopped, reached out with trembling fingers to touch a photograph of herself at 6 years old, missing a front tooth. Her mother's hand wrapped protectively around her shoulder. "I look happy," she whispered. "You were," Griffin said. "At least then." She turned toward the table where the letters rested. Griffin didn't move to help her. This was hers. Rosalind picked one up, then another. She read in silence, shoulders stiff at first, then gradually folding inward as the words found their mark. Edgar's voice lived in those pages, not loud, not eloquent, but unmistakably present. "I used to think he didn't care if I left," she said finally, "that he chose the house over me." Griffin shook his head. "He chose what he knew how to protect." "That's not the same thing," she said sharply, then softened. "But I see now. It was the only thing he could do." She moved to the projector and traced its edge with her thumb. "You don't have to," Griffin began. "I want to," Rosalind said. She flipped the switch. The projector whirred softly. Light spilled onto the wall. Grainy footage flickered into life. Her mother, Evelyn, seated in a rocking chair, cradling a baby. The lullaby filled the room, soft, steady, unmistakable. Rosalind's knees buckled. Griffin caught her elbow and steadied her without pulling her away from the sound. Ranger rose and pressed gently against her leg, warmth anchoring her to the floor. Rosalind didn't sob. She cried quietly, tears tracking down her face, as if the years had finally found permission to leave. "I forgot how safe her voice made everything," she whispered. "I forgot how much I missed it." The lullaby ended. The projector clicked off, respectful. Silence followed. Not empty, but full. Rosalind wiped her face and laughed once, breathless and shaky. "Everyone thought this house was haunted." "It was," Griffin said softly. "Just not by anything that wanted harm." She nodded, eyes on the wall where her mother's image had been. As Rosalind turned away from the wall, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He moved toward the doorway of the hidden room and stopped, ears forward, eyes fixed on the hallway beyond. Then slowly, he stepped aside, clearing a path, as if inviting someone unseen to pass. Rosalind followed his gaze. For a heartbeat, she felt it, not a presence, not a figure, but a release. Like the sensation of a held note finally resolving. Her breath hitched. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Griffin nodded. "Yes." Ranger sat down again, tail relaxed. Whatever had lingered here had loosened its grip. Rosalind spent the next hour sorting through the room with care. She chose a few photographs, folded the letters neatly, and returned others to their places. She wrapped the doll in its cloth again, holding it for a moment before setting it gently on the shelf. "I don't want to erase this," she said, "but I don't want it to trap anyone anymore." "We can change how it works," Griffin said. "Together." They removed the mechanical timer and unplugged the projector. Griffin packed the equipment carefully, labeling it, preserving it without allowing it to rule the night. When they stepped back into the living room, the house felt lighter, subtly, undeniably so. Rosalind stood by the front door, hand on the knob. "I don't know what I'll do with this place," she said. "Sell it. Keep it. I just know I don't hate it anymore." "That's enough for tonight," Griffin said. She turned to him. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I know," he replied, "but some missions don't end when you walk away." She smiled faintly. "You're a strange man, Griffin Vale. I've been called worse." Outside, the night had settled into a calm rhythm. A neighbor's porch light flicked on across the road. A car passed without slowing. No one stared. Rosalind paused at her car. "Thank you," she said, "for not telling me who my father was, for letting me see him myself." Griffin nodded. "That was always yours to decide." She hesitated, then added, "If people stop talking about the house—" "They will," Griffin said. "And if they don't," he shrugged, "it won't be fear anymore." She drove away, taillights fading into the dark. Griffin stood on the porch with Ranger beside him. The house behind them felt quiet in a new way, settled, not waiting. Later that night, Griffin turned off the lights and lay down. Ranger curled near his feet, breathing slow and even. The clocks ticked normally. No chimes rose to claim the hour. Sleep came easily. Outside, the trees whispered to one another, no longer gossiping, just breathing. The house had exhaled, and for the first time since it had been built, it rested. Sometimes, the miracles we wait for do not arrive as thunder or light. They arrive quietly, through truth finally spoken, through forgiveness we were afraid to touch, through love that endured even when it was poorly expressed. This story reminds us of something simple and sacred. God does not always remove pain from our lives, but He often leaves us signs small, patient signs waiting for the moment we are ready to see them. A memory, a voice, a second chance to understand someone we thought we had lost forever. In our daily lives, we carry unfinished conversations, unspoken love, and wounds we pretend no longer hurt. Maybe today is not about fixing everything. Maybe it is only about listening more carefully to our hearts, to one another, and to the quiet guidance God places in our path. If this story moved you, let it move beyond the screen. Share it with someone who might need hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking these journeys together. And wherever you are, whatever you are carrying, may God watch over you, protect you, and gently lead you toward peace. Thank you for being here.